comes in the name of the Lord. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. You're interested in leading a small group, but you're a little afraid. What are you getting yourself into? How do you get started? Don't worry, you are not alone. This new book, Small Groups Made Easy, provides practical pointers showing you how to overcome challenges and lead discussions. The first half of the book will cover things like understanding your role, organizing your gatherings, responding to shy or overly talkative members, taking care of your group, and much more. The second half of the book is made up of 12 short Bible studies that include icebreaker questions, discussion guides, and sample prayers. These studies are focused on key spiritual questions that routinely arise in small groups, such as, what is God like? Or how do I grow spiritually? How should I pray? Where is God when I suffer? How can I repair broken relationships? And practical aspects of living the life of a believer. In this book, you'll discover all the tools you need to lead an effective, enjoyable, life-giving small group. Dr. Ryan Lokkesmoe is the lead pastor of Real Hope Community Church in the Houston area. He earned his doctorate in New Testament at the University of Denver, his master's degree at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. He's written small group curriculum and several books, including Paul and his team, What the Early Church Can Teach Us About Leadership and Influence. You can learn more at Ryan Lokkesmoe, LOKKESMOE.com. Here to talk about small groups made easy, practical and biblical starting points to lead your gathering is our good friend, Dr. Ryan Lokkesmoe. Ryan, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you're quite welcome. We had a great conversation with you, I think it was about a year and a half ago. I'm trying to think of how long it's been since we had you on. But we hit on some, I think, poignant, provocative, kind of a different twist, a different look at what the New Testament church kind of had several different dimensions, and we'll do that again. We'll do that again today. But for our audience that wasn't with us at that time, we have grown exponentially. We've added about 50 countries to the roster, and we are now in every time zone across the world in prime time. So we're actually replayed in a whole around the world. Just go east and keep on going until you come back to here tomorrow morning. But tell us your story, kind of your journey to faith. You didn't come out of the womb with a Bible, and your first words weren't Jesus. They were just like the rest of us. So how did you come into this calling? What was the environment you were raised in? And when did faith really become your own?
Well, I did grow up in a Christian home, but I came to faith at a young age. And looking back, I'm very thankful for that. I mean, I had parents who prioritized church life. They encouraged me to ask the important questions. They never... while our faith was central to our life, it never took the form of, you better believe this because this is what we believe, and it never took on that kind of heavy-handed approach. It was, we want you to love Jesus because this is what we believe about Jesus, and so I'm really thankful for that. Not just what my family believed, but the way that expressed itself, and the way my parents encouraged me to really understand it on my own and seek out answers to hard questions and things like that. And so to your point about when did faith really become my own, I think I would say probably late high school is when I can remember feeling interested in going to church on my own, that, I wasn't going anymore because my parents wanted me to go. I was learning things that meant something to me. My deepest friendships were becoming the people at church rather than at school, because we were just growing together and kind of on the same path. And then getting into college really is when I started, grappling with the deeper questions, things I'd always wondered about, some of the historical questions about about Jesus's life and things like that. And I had some friends that we would just talk all the time. We'd stay up late at night and, just sit on the back porch and just talk about, well, what if this? And, I wonder if God's like this, and, just those deeper questions. And so it was in college that faith really was, my relationship with Christ really was taking center stage. And it was around that time I was working at my church part-time in the youth ministry, and some of my mentors were saying, maybe God has something for you in terms of work, vocational ministry of some kind. At that time, I wasn't really thinking I would become a pastor. I think I misunderstood what being a pastor meant, but at that time, I just thought that's not really for me. But I did feel like the Lord was leading me towards something, and so I finished college, and I through a variety of ways, I felt led to go to seminary. And I still wasn't thinking I'd be a pastor. I was thinking I would be a professor. I'd go teach at a seminary, teach at a college. And so I went to Gordon Conwell Seminary in the Boston area because they had the reputation of kind of serious intellectual engagement with people who don't believe what we believe. And I wanted to go on and do doctoral level work. And it seemed like the kind of place to do that. And so I did a master's degree in New Testament. And still thinking academics. And at the end of that, I applied to PhD programs. They were all secular PhD programs. On the advice of my mentors, they said, go out and find a program where you're going to have to engage with people who think very differently about the Bible, who think, different presuppositions about Christ, and put your faith in dialogue with people like that. And so the University of Denver ended up offering me a spot to continue. And so my wife and I, we've been married 2 years. By the end of seminary, we moved again, almost all the way across the country to Colorado, and spent 3 years there in the doctoral program studying the New Testament, in particular, kind of the historical backdrop of first century Christianity. Still planning to go into academics, but during that program, actually when I was about a year from finishing, I really felt the Lord leading me toward ministry of some kind, and not that I wouldn't be involved in academics in some way, but that ministry leadership was really where He was leading me. And I won't go into all the ways that he made that clear, but suffice to say, it was pretty clear. And so we started praying about that, and at the end of that program, rather than starting to apply to universities and seminaries and things like that, I started applying to churches, and I was looking for a role that would be kind of in the discipleship realm of some kind. I've had this graduate school education in theology and biblical studies. How can I help people understand the Bible and grow deeper in their faith? And so I applied for jobs all around the country that were in that vein, and ended up getting offered a job in small groups ministry here in the Houston area. And we were from Dallas, and so that was kind of neat to come back to Texas. But I had not taken any classes on being a pastor. I mean, my entire education was just strictly, the academic study of Scripture and theology. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of get into the trenches and lead a small groups ministry that was, I think at the time there were about 60 small groups at this church, and it grew over the next number of years to a little over 100. And so it was a large-scale ministry. I had to learn what it looks like to find leaders, train leaders, help them see the purpose of a small group, all those kinds of things, and it was great. But then about 5 years into that, I really felt led to kind of reconnect. When I was in graduate school, I really developed a passion for connecting with people who don't believe what I believe. And that was partly because I was in this secular doctoral program. And in the job at the church where I was a small groups pastor, that wasn't really a feature of that church, of kind of reaching out and dialogue with people who don't believe what we believe. And so I really felt the Lord leading me to kind of find some sort of role where I could reconnect with people who have intellectual doubts about faith, who aren't sure about who Jesus is. And so another long story short, I ended up my wife and I and another family, we planted a church in 2016 in another part of Houston, with the explicit aim of finding those people who they don't believe in God, or they're not sure about Jesus, and invite them into a dialogue and exploring the faith. And so that's where I am now. I'm the lead pastor there at Real Hope Community Church, and church is growing and it's healthy, and we have all the challenges and problems you would imagine of a 3-year-old church, but God's doing great work, and so I serve in that role, and I also teach as an adjunct professor, teach New Testament at a local seminary here, and so that's my story.
You and I do believe the same thing. We just happen to have a different name for it. All right, and you call it first century Christianity, and I call it first century Judaism. Because the church in Antioch is dated at 42 A.D. So the first believers were Jewish. And the first time the word Christian was used at Antioch, 42 years after the crucifixion of Christ, first century is 42% done, and it's first century Judaism. And this is now the incorporation, and then comes the confrontation and the conflagration, and then the great confusion of Constantine, and then almost 2,000 years of incredible confusion as to the role of the Old Testament in the Christian world, and is it just Jesus only? Because the Father has been relegated to a supporting role. The Holy Spirit's left out of the narrative of, I don't know, maybe 70 or 80% of the churches that I've visited. They don't even acknowledge. They're too scared of the Holy Spirit. It's too frightening. It's too powerful. It's if you bring that up, then you confuse people about salvation. So let's just stick with the narrow. See, he said narrow is so we're just going to stick with the narrow dialogue. And the narrow dialogue is too narrow, because how do you acknowledge a Trinitarian view in your opening dialogue, and then you go 1/3 for the rest of all your narrative? And so it does become really quite confusing.
That's true. Yeah, to keep the Trinity in view in a truly biblical way is hard, and you do lead to over or under emphasis on one person or the other. And I think the way that plays out in a lot of churches, like with the Holy Spirit, for example, is either an overemphasis, where sort of a personal experience of the Spirit is all there is to strive after and know, or in other churches, the underemphasis, where you feel really alone, because it's like, well, I placed my faith in Jesus, but now I'm like out here in the cold trying to follow Christ, and you don't remember the indwelling Spirit and that whole angle. So I completely agree. Yeah,
it's interesting, because I still hold on to my Old Testament view of the compound unity, and I don't subscribe to a 3 separate person view.
Okay.
I subscribe to the fact that I'm talking to Ryan Lokkesmoe. Well, Ryan Lokkesmoe's a PhD. Ryan Lokkesmoe's a husband. Ryan Lokkesmoe's a father. Ryan Lokkesmoe's a son. He's a student. He's a friend. Are there 6 Ryan Lokkesmoes? There are not. There's only one. Right, but he's a compound unity. And who am I talking to right now? Am I talking to the theologian? Am I talking to my friend? Am I talking to a fellow peer? And we're doing a peer review of a concept, and that's exactly what we are going to do, is a peer review of a concept of the role of small group, why it's essential, coming out of the Jewish world into the Jewish believing world. We didn't call it small group, we called it home fellowship. That was the label we put on it.
Sure.
Because we were trying to replicate something that we saw in home fellowship, which was where the Acts 2 body, after spending in the daylight hours, studying in the courtyard outside the temple, in the court of the Gentiles, the apostles' teaching, would then break into small groups and to go into home fellowship, and you'd invite people with you, and if you happen to find out and discover they had a need, well, like you didn't have a change of clothes. Okay, you're poor. Well, I've got an extra change of clothes. Here, let me give that to you. And by the time we're done with the evening, we've prayed together, we've broken bread together, we've had fellowship together, we've kind of summarized any of the talking points that happened during the day that really confused you or stuck out to you, or you know, maybe whoever the home it was in was the leader of it and kind of guided the discussion. But it was probative. It was inquiring into the person and the personal connection, because in the larger setting, there might have been an orator, if we take a look at the old kind of Greek model. One person teaching that day, and people gathered around them, listening to them give an expository teaching on the apostles' teaching. And since there were only so many apostles, they'd have a rotation. They'd have, you know, who was in town, because not everybody stayed in Jerusalem. Okay, they went off to different places. So there's a cultural aspect to this concept of small group that says, all right, who's qualified? If they were studying the apostles' teaching, who was leading it? Okay, so and then who would continue the dialogue? So the Great Commission was to go out. All right, but if everybody went out, and it's actually kind of interesting, it parallels the Zionistic view of every Jew should move to Israel. My grandfather, who came from the old country to America, said, I don't understand that view. If every Jew moves to Israel, who's going to raise money for the Jews in the United States where there's money? Because there's no money. Everybody's broke in Israel. So if everybody goes to broke Israel, where are they going to get their support from? And so I was raised in a home in the early 50s, first post-Holocaust generation, with this attitude that everybody should go to Israel. And he's like, where are they going to get the money? How are they going to live? If there's nobody here raising money for them, why go? So somebody had to stay in Jerusalem. Okay, we know it was Peter, right? That was the one who stayed. So who's the apostle who's teaching? Was it Peter? Okay, well, it was Peter in the upper room who came down and brought the message. Peter. So likely Peter played a significant role in this teaching, and it was Peter sent to Cornelius. So he was the one that was kind of responsible for this unification, if you would, no longer a separation of Jew and Gentile, but this, as Paul writes in Ephesians 2, from the two he shall make one new man. So this was kind of what the model I always thought when I heard that the church was moving towards, we're going to do away with Wednesday nights, and we're going to this new model. And I remember hearing the announcements of churches saying, oh, no more Wednesday nights. We're going to a small group model. We believe that there should be more cohesiveness within the body, and this is how we're going to do it. And so they started out with maybe 8, and you know, who had homes, and really in several of the churches, the church offered up the gymnasium to one group, the fellowship hall to another group. They actually met at the church because people didn't have homes large enough for the limited amount of of groups in the large
Yeah.
amount of people.
Mm.
So that was kind of as I watched it birth here in Birmingham, Alabama, which we're the
Yeah.
Bible Belt. We have 2,800 churches supporting 1 million people. So
Wow.
when you began to look at this model, you said that you grew to 100 small groups. I looked at a very large church here in Birmingham, and I think they have like 2,500 small groups
Yeah.
and choices. So is the vision that this was for the purpose of having a smaller fellowship, more cohesiveness among the body, and to have somebody who was kind of groomed to be able to be a facilitator of a narrative, a prescribed curriculum or coursework, or even a self-developed study of a particular book of the Bible, or a concept of redemption or sanctification, or a kind of what I would call discipleship. So what was the original model?
I think it's hard to just concisely summarize, because I think the movement into small group ministry was sort of decentralized. But my basic impression of why this model within the modern Western church became popular is a feeling that of wanting to kind of spread out the leadership responsibilities of the church, to say, we don't want the discipleship opportunities to be limited just to, paid staff, or, a few key leaders in the church. We want people, like there's a lot of great potential leaders within the church that are just kind of sitting there listening to services, right, or listening to these large Bible studies. So let's really raise up some leaders. And so I think it was partly a leadership thing, but also I think partly wanting to help people actually connect and get to know people in the church, particularly as they get larger. You mentioned a church that has 2,500 small groups. I think about some of the churches where this was first pioneered, like, Saddleback and places like that. It was kind of like, well, our church is getting so big, nobody's going to know each other. Right. They're not going to have the experience of walking through life with someone, because this place is a stadium. So how can we still create an environment where people are known and know each other and take care of each other? And also, how can we create more channels for people to step up and lead? And so I think it achieved multiple things. They wanted to increase fellowship. They wanted to increase discipleship opportunities, more variety, less focus on the centralized church campus. One large church, I don't remember which one, but it might have been North Point in Atlanta, did the math on how much money they've saved. They feel they've saved by having a small group ministry model. Sort of like if we had all of these people that are currently in small groups meeting on campus in a facility, in rooms and things we had to build, it would have cost, $30 million or something along those lines. So I think there's financial dimensions, spiritual dimensions, fellowship, leadership development. I think all of these were threads that led some of the larger churches to embrace this as a model. But I do think a distinction should be made, and I actually make this in the book, between in the book I call them kind of big S small groups, which is what we're talking about, large scale formalized ministries, and then kind of small s small groups, just groups of Christians that happen to be small. And what my book is speaking to is that second category. It's sort of like, small gatherings of believers, as you know, starting in the first century. That is the oldest model of ministry. So even though small groups feels kind of like a new ministry model in America, that's not a new thing. And in the Western church, we have the luxury of viewing it as, a strategy of ministry. But for most of the history of the church, and in most places around the world today, particularly places like India and others where there's a lot of poverty within the church, small groups isn't a model that they've chosen of, carefully weighed options. That's just church. That's just the way you gather, is in these small gatherings. And so,
I'll give you an example. This program, we launched it in 2017. We're prime time. We start out in the Middle East. It was the goal to start out prime time in Israel. Well, it also
okay.
happens to be prime time in Pakistan. And
Oh,
all of
wow.
a sudden, I started getting emails from Pakistan. And the emails read, "Dear Papa." And it was from a bishop. And he said, we now have 25 who are gathering together, 25 groups. They're gathering together in their home, and they're watching the program. And
Yeah.
now we're up to 50. And so today, now almost as we finish our third year, we're up to 120 home groups under this
Wow.
bishop that sends me a report once a month. "Dear Papa." We're now up to 120, and there are 20 to 25 people in each one of these groups, and they're gathering around a device, whether or not it's a laptop or it's a tablet on the
Sure.
internet, and they're
Yeah.
watching and they're hearing, because they're not able to get these books. They're not able to get these
Yeah.
conversations. It's not available. They're the persecuted church. They actually have one person who's outside looking for somebody who's going to come in and try to
Wow.
disrupt them.
Yeah.
So that is the model. That's the model of the underground church in
Exactly.
China, the way the South Korean church got started and then just became huge.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about it is it's still a an undefined, almost like a deregulated aspect of church,
That's true.
in the fact that there's nobody really kind of overseeing and looking at the quality. Now, if you were traveling around and dropping in as
Yeah.
the small group's pastor, or you had a group of small
Uh-huh.
group pastors, and you drop in and just kind of sit in and listen in and check in
Yeah.
and review, or have the leaders in.
Sure.
Uh, uh, that would kind of now all you have to do is register. In some places, just register, and if it
Uh-huh.
doesn't get rejected, well then, hey, here's your mission statement, is that we all share this in common, and we wouldn't have fellowship with other people, and this is how we're doing fellowship. And at the end of the bike run, or at the end of the 10K, as we drink, as we rehydrate, and as we reprotein, we talk about whatever it is we talk about. And so
Sure.
it on the surface, some of it looks kind of basket weaving and underwater sculpting, and some kind of odd uh, uh, supernatural growth, that you wonder exactly what it is that they are doing, and
Yeah.
wonder what they are talking about. But it is a tremendous money saver. Uh, the example
Yeah.
the example you gave probably may be why Andy Stanley decided to do away with the Old Testament, because it was cheaper just to buy New Testaments. Maybe that was his motivation to get rid of the Old Testament. I'm not sure. That's just my sense of humor as an Old Testament guy, uh, listening to this debate that's been going back and forth for the last six
Yeah.
months.
Interesting discussion. Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard it, and
Yep.
the defense and the misunderstanding and the understanding. But nevertheless, small groups can be and our home fellowships were very significant. We found
Yep.
ways that people that were shut-ins, that were able to get rides now,
Yeah.
and get connected when they were disconnected before, and nobody even knew
Mm.
about them. And somebody mentioned it, or they were a small group that met at a nursing home, and
Yeah.
became a part of that. And then they brought people to services. And it really was a growth factor for us. We're talking with Ryan Lokkesmoe, who's written a new book called Small Groups Made Easy, Practical and Biblical Starting Points to Lead Your Gathering. I think that every organization needs to have guidelines for small groups. Whether or not your church has guidelines or not, I think that this is an outstanding resource. As I read it, it made sense to me. This was kind of the model I had in my mind when I heard about this concept, that this is a mini upper room or mini Acts chapter 2 gathering to go deeper or broader or to pick a particular area of confusion, to build disciples, maybe even a small group to raise up small group leaders would be a great small group to have of 10, 15, 20 families that have a heart for small groups, but they want to get together and spend 10 weeks, 12 weeks, three months, 4 months together to figure out and have an accountability group, have a mentoring group. It makes a great deal of sense and becomes much more organic than this, well, let's just go play Frisbee golf because we have that in common. And that we look at the commonalities and it's only fellowship, which is too one-sided. There needs to be the balance, and I think that's exactly what you've done here, is struck a balance. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the key aspects to this book, Small Groups Made Easy. What are some of the practical and biblical starting points so you can have, even in a small church, you might have 3, 4, 5, but you still have it available to you to be able to break out into smaller groups and build a more cohesive, and I can tell you, your church retention will grow. And you may have a small group that doesn't understand tithing. Great opportunity to talk about financial management, tithing, giving, serving, all of those areas. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of 2 Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. We're talking with Ryan Lokkesmoe, author of the new book, Small Groups Made Easy, Practical and Biblical Starting Points to Lead Your Gathering. Ryan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So Ryan, this idea to write kind of a leader's guide for the leader was birthed out of what you were experiencing, what you're seeing, what you saw was the need, the struggle, helping people overcome. What was the vision for the project?
As you know, I'd written the previous book, Paul and His Team, and I was kind of looking for the next project. What did I want to write about? And I had some ideas, and I'd been praying about that. And it was interesting the way this book came about. The way it came about is that the publisher, Bethany House, they wanted to put out a book on small group leadership. It was just a category, a book that they wanted to publish, a resource that they looked at their catalog and thought, we need to do something on small groups. So my literary agent, who was helping me figure out, what should you write next, what should you do, she got wind of the fact that they wanted to write this book, and she kind of got in that conversation and said, hey, one of my clients, he wrote this book on Paul and the early church, like, you might want to talk to him, he might have a good idea. So I got into that conversation, and so I actually wasn't planning to write a book on small groups, but I got connected, and they asked me, well, if you wrote a book on small groups, how would you write it? And it was interesting because my first thought was, there's been so much written about small groups. I mean, there's so many books, so many resources. What unique angle could I bring?
Right.
And as I thought about it, this is the key idea that I landed on, that I ultimately pitched to the publisher, and they were very excited about, and that's why this book came about. The idea was this: almost every book that I've read on small group ministry, and I've been to conferences on small groups and all kinds of, participated in other training programs, almost every resource I've ever encountered, the approach to training and preparing leaders is almost entirely practical and pragmatic. It's kind of it leaves you with the feeling that, if I just get the group size right, and if I just get the meeting frequency correct, and if I handle childcare the right way, and if I do all these things, it's like a little formula, I will have a healthy small group. And my view, and that's what the basis of this book was, the deepest challenges and the most profound questions that face a small group are not practical in nature. They're spiritual. It's questions of faith. It's who is God and what's he like and what's my life supposed to be about and how do I, live out my faith in this way. And so my basic idea was, if you want to prepare a leader to lead a small group, they need both some practical training on just basic leadership skills and also some theological preparation. Because that side, the spiritual leadership side, is the side that does two things. You alluded to this earlier. Small group pastors and ministry leaders feel a little anxiety of kind of like what's being taught in these groups. Do these leaders have their theology sorted out? So that issue needs to be addressed, but also the leaders themselves it can remove a lot of anxiety if they feel that they have some basic exposure to the kinds of biblical and theological questions that are just going to keep coming up over and over and over in different disguises in the life of their group. And so that was my pitch for the book was, let's have a part one be a very concise overview of some of the practical issues that are important, like leading a healthy discussion. So let's have a portion that does talk about that, but let's have a second part of the book that walks through these 12 key theological questions that, in my experience, leaders will encounter over and over and over again. And in the process of preparing a leader, both practically and spiritually, I think that they just have a certain confidence that they know what this leadership role is, and they know what it's not. And they don't put too much pressure on themselves, to be an expert in all of these things, but they've been prepared more holistically for what the role is. So that was the vision. That was the approach. It's practical leadership and spiritual leadership. Let's prepare leaders on both of those sides.
One of the things you and I, as I'm a former congregational leader, but the pulpit has always been my heart. I just have different pulpits. I have this pulpit, which is a television pulpit that gives me opportunities to teach. We do a live audience teaching on the campus at University of Alabama in a large setting, which we call Revealing the Bible. And I actually do a verse-by-verse expository teaching in Hebrew and English, and we're going through the entirety of the Bible, every chapter, every verse. Long. I mean, we're 2.5 years into it. We're just finishing Genesis, and so this is something that'll take me to I won't live to see Revelation, I can assure you, at this pace. But it's what people really want, and you'd be surprised at how hungry their people are that really just want the Word, and they're not getting preached the Word. They're getting preached a message. That's what they're getting on Sunday. They're not getting the Word, they're getting the message. And so that's really where the birth of the Message Bible came from, is, well, if you want the message, well, just read it. This is kind of the source book your pastor's going to sermon starters and those kind of things. But one of the things that really concerned me about small group leaders was the fact that they were reluctant to say they didn't know. And it's because pastors are reluctant to say
That's true.
they don't know.
Yes.
About 40 years ago, might be 40 years ago, Reader's Digest did a cover story. I'm still a Reader's Digest subscriber, oddly enough. It's the only magazine I get. But I still get the Reader's Digest. I don't know. It's just something about it. It's easy reading. In all this heavy doctoral level stuff, I read every book that comes that I interview. It's overwhelming. I just need needed something else to read. The 3 least used words in the English language are "I don't know," and I've sat in many conferences as one of the conference speakers, or even as the keynote, but I would sit through others who were the speakers as well. I think it's respectful. I don't think the keynote should come, show up, deliver, sell a bunch of books, leave, and not be a part of the conference for the other 2 days. I just don't. Maybe that's old corporate training, because I came out of the corporate world. But I just don't think it's I think you should be shepherds are supposed to smell like sheep. You're not supposed to smell like cologne. You're supposed to smell like sheep. So you got to be with the people.
That's right.
And I began to realize that it really are the 3 least used words. I didn't hear anybody say "I don't know" when they were asked a question. They would come up with an answer. And the answer was not complete. It wasn't thorough. So I've become really proud of being able to say to people, I've dedicated almost my entire life to the Old Testament, the last 23 years to the entirety of the scriptures, but you're asking me a question, you know what, I don't know. But if you're interested in finding out the answer, then here's a couple resources for you to go to do the research. Because that question isn't burning in me, and I can live the rest of my life without the answer. So because I don't know, but it's important to you, I'm going to give you that assignment. And if you're going to be here next week, then come share the answer with us if that's important to you. And they would kind of look at me and like, well, you don't know? No, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't know. I'm on the same learning journey you are.
Yeah.
Some people are really great with numbers. I'm not. Everything to me is 2,000 years old or 5,000 years old. Those are the only two time periods of the Bible. Okay?
Yeah.
It was either from the beginning, 5,000 years, or Jesus, 2,000 years. Okay? Anything else to me is just, it's like north is Canada, south is Florida. I mean, that's all there is to me. So that's just how my brain works. And I'm old enough now where you get comfortable with saying that's how I am. I'm not gonna change. In this, you do this. You actually equip. I did not expect when it came, and it was pitched to me by Bethany House, that it was going to be an equipping. And that it was actually going to take and allow somebody to navigate spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Why it's important. When you picked the areas that you picked, what was the driving force for picking the areas, and which one do you think was the pivot, the one that kind of was the nucleus, that was the starting point, that if I can grasp this concept, the other ones will become easier for me?
Yeah. Well, I will say, just on the previous note of what you were talking about, admitting you don't know, that is something I talk about in the book, of kind of leaders not over-preparing for their gatherings and kind of viewing themselves as a co-learner with their group members. And everything you just said is true. It's, if you don't know the answer, you model for your group how to find the answer. I don't know the answer to that. This week I'm going to email this seminary professor down the road, or I'm going to bring this book next time. Let's discover the answer together. So that is such a paradigm shift from, I think, a lot of what people feel spiritual leadership is styling yourself as someone who's kind of arrived, and you're just schooling these people who, aren't, where you are. And so I think even the way you talked about that, of being on a journey together, that's a very important lens for small group leaders to have. But to your question of kind of the part two of the book, what these 12 areas, spiritual questions, why did I choose those? What I did was I just thought back to all of the small groups I've been a part of, and when I was leading small group ministry, and all of the hundreds of leaders that I was interacting with, and the kinds of questions that they continuously dealt with, where they would send me emails, somebody in my group is asking about this, and I just wanted to address those questions that I just think keep coming up over and over again. So I started off with, what is God like? Which is, how do you even begin to approach a subject like that? But I wanted to at least give a starting point. So, in no way do I feel that, I exhaustively covered all that there is to say about all these questions, but I want the leaders to have a starting point of how they should think about these. What is grace? How does God view me? That's a huge one. There is so much pain and confusion in the life of believers in a misunderstanding of how they think God views them. And that leads people down roads of self-condemnation and viewing God as a very kind of stingy God. And, so some of those are more fundamental questions. What's God like? How does he view me? What is grace? What does it mean to grow spiritually? And so kind of questions that will combat a lot of the tendencies that continuously arise in these groups, tendencies of viewing God as being stingy or unloving, being trying to take on all the burden onto yourself to grow instead of trusting in the Lord to transform you. One of the chapters is, where is God when I suffer? I mean, that couldn't be more relevant for small group ministry. I mean, that shows up all the time when someone loses a job or loses a loved one, or they're dealing with illness. So I tried to structure those 12 along questions that, in my experience, believers in small groups just continually confront. And they may not even know that they're dealing with this question. They're just going through something hard. But there's a question underneath the experience they're going through that, if they seek out the answer to that question, it will give them encouragement and direction. And so that's why I structured the second part of the book around these questions.
How much
if the
emphasis,
leader can grapple with these. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, we only have about a minute and a half. How much emphasis on prayer, praying together in a small group, do you put as a key component part of the small group dynamic?
So in the second part of the book, those 12 questions, they're structured as group studies, and prayer is a fixture in the model of kind of how you would go about a group meeting. So prayer is woven into what I think should be a part of every group meeting, and I even do have a chapter in that section, how should I pray? So prayer is definitely a central feature of that. Yeah.
When this is done right, it really does create a group of under shepherds that have the first line should be your neighborhood, and your neighborhood in the church is your small group. That's your neighborhood. And so when there's needs and you have somebody in the group that's ill, the group should respond by bringing the meals. That should be the first line of defense. That should be the first line of support, the first line of visitation. Then if it gets to be bigger, or there's an underlying problem, suspecting alcoholism, drug abuse, adultery, those kind of things, the small group leader has a responsibility pastorally to go to his leadership, to go to the pastor with, I think something's happening here, and I'm not equipped to deal with it. And the truth is, you're exactly right. You are not equipped to deal with it. I'm glad you brought it to my attention, and you're able to strategize. And I think it kind of puts a lid on gossip, a lid on slander, a lid on fried pastor, where you're sitting around complaining about the pastor. Complaining about the music, it kind of puts a lid on that if there's some accountability and cross-accountability. So I highly recommend the book called Small Groups Made Easy, Practical and Biblical Starting Points to Lead Your Gathering, by author Ryan Lokkesmoe, Lokkesmoe, and the website is ryanlokkesmoe.com. Ryan, always great to have you on the program. Write another book, come on back on.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
All right, God bless. Thanks. Shalom.
You too.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.